Welcome to another episode. Today, I'm thrilled to be having a conversation with Krysten. Krysten is a psychologist, author, and illustrator with over 20 years' experience working with children and families in various settings, including schools, private practice, and government agencies. Furthermore, she has extensive experience working with people who have autism, as well as conducting diagnostic assessments. She recognizes that some mental health related disturbances will require regular sessions. However, sometimes parents just need some tips, some advice, and perhaps a dash of creativity to bring change to their children's lives. Welcome, Krysten.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Okay, so let's kind of get right into this.
Mm-hmm.
To meet our children's emotional needs, we as parents need to meet our own, right? And we live in a society right now where, again, generally speaking, where emotionally dysregulated parents are raising children, perhaps due to unresolved generational trauma as one example. It is indisputable, though, that you need to be what you want your child to learn. And I think you have a post about this as well.
Yep.
More often than not, I think our child's behaviors our reactions to our child's behaviors are triggers subconsciously, rather, of unresolved issues within. So my question to you, Krysten, in your clinical experience, what would you suggest are the three biggest pitfalls of modern day parenting?
Gosh, yeah, that's a big question. So you're right. One of the main things is that we need to work on ourselves. And the problem with that is that we often don't know what our triggers are until they're triggered. And, you'll hear all the time, before people have children, they're perfect parents. They know exactly what they'll do and how they'll do it. When they have children, though, that's when the triggers come out. That's when they learn, or they'll respond, and I guarantee they'll respond ways that they didn't think they ever would, and say things that they thought they would never say. So I guess the biggest thing to remember as a parent is to realize that we all have triggers, and you may not know them until you're a parent. So I guess that would be one of the main issues. I think another pitfall that parents have is their expectations of children are far beyond what they're capable of. I think parents, and in general, adults don't have a great understanding of child brain development and what they're capable of doing at certain ages. So it's absolutely perfectly normal for a child to drop to the ground and have a meltdown because their biscuit broke in half. Like that's absolutely normal, because that's where their brain development is. They don't have the prefrontal cortex developed. They can't think logically that it's just broken, it still tastes good. They can't do that. But our expectations of children is often higher than what we put on ourselves. And parents don't often realize that we will speak disrespectfully to a child, or we will start yelling over something, and yet we expect a child not to yell back, and we expect a child not to have a meltdown, or we expect children to share everything, and yet adults don't share everything. There's definitely things that we keep that are not to share. So that's another thing with expectations and understanding development, because it's not something that, unless you look and gain the information, it's not widely taught, and it should be. The other problem, I guess, is that we, as parents, we try and do too much, and we try and do everything. We put everyone else's needs above our own. But like you said earlier, if you're not meeting your own needs, then you're depleted, and you can't meet your child's needs. You can't be the parent you want to be. So it is important to put things in place. I mean, there's seasons to parenting. So if you've got a newborn, you really are in survival because there's lack of sleep and they constantly need you. But you also need to find a way at different stages where you can meet your needs as well, just so you can meet theirs as the child's as well.
So, as you mentioned, we have all these expectations, right? And there's definitely not a blueprint, perhaps, to parenting. Of course, there's resources and classes and we can utilize, but again, I'm not a parent, so I can't speak from experience, but I can imagine once you're in that, visceral experience, things change quite quickly. So What is your philosophy on parenting, and how does this influence your therapeutic approach?
So my whole thinking about parenting and therapy has changed a lot over the years. When I first became a psychologist, it was very much behavioralism, rewards and punishments, do this, do that. I no longer believe that at all. That doesn't help change internal motivation for a child. That doesn't help them to understand why they do what they do. It doesn't help them to gain their own morals and ethics, all that kind of stuff. That is just trying to manipulate behavior. I can almost boil down the importance rules of parenting in very few things. The first thing is relationship and connection. That is your most important thing. So whatever is blocking a connection and a positive relationship with your child, that's what needs to be worked on. So whether that's something in you, whether that's something that's going on externally, that's the most important thing, because if you have that connection, if you have that relationship with your child, the other things fall into place. So if there are behavioral issues going on around something, if you can keep that connection and keep open with that child, they're more likely to listen to you. You will have a better understanding of where they're coming from, and then you can move forward. So in that connection, in looking to try and keep that connection, that relationship, you're also trying to understand their point of view. Behavior is communication. So whatever's going on, whatever they're doing, they're trying to communicate something, they just don't have the words for it. So if you are able to go, okay, I don't know what's going on here. How can I help? Help me see it from your side. Do you think you're feeling like this? What's happening? And then you can work together. So if you have good connection with your child, you work together, problem solving together. It's really important. It helps you because you're trying to get whatever you need done, but it helps them develop the skills to be able to problem solve as well. And if you involve them in the process, they're more likely to do what you want them to do because they helped come up with the idea. If they're just being told, do this or that'll happen, well, where's the motivation to do the right thing other than you're going to get in trouble? So you're helping them understand the reasons why, what else you could do. You're helping their brain development because it's helps them see that there's other consequences. So you could say, well, we could do this, but what would happen next? And then what would happen? And how would everyone feel? So they're then learning to look a little bit further than just the immediate. Not something young children can do, but the more you practice, the better they get at it. Then the next thing that I will boil down parenting to is that you apologize to your child. I think a lot of parents find that really difficult. A lot of adults today have never been apologized to from their parents because it was just, you do as you're told. And even if the parent stuffs up, well, they're still the parent, so they don't say anything about it. But it is very, very important that if you do something that you probably shouldn't have done, or you said something, or you reacted in a way that you later thought, oh, I shouldn't have done that. If you apologize to your child, oh, look, mum stuffed up. I was feeling really angry. I let it take over. I shouldn't have done that. I should have taken a break. I maybe should have gone and done something else. I spoke to you in a way that I'm sorry for. And in doing that, you're modeling how to do that to your child. So they then learn, oh, when we're being respectful, we actually apologize. We say what we've done wrong and admit it. And then then the problem solving comes in. There's always a good opportunity. So, what could we have both done differently in that situation? I don't want to do that again. It didn't feel good for me. It didn't feel good for you. What else could we do next? And really, those few little keys, if you stick to those in just about any situation, you're going in the right direction. No one's perfect. No one's going to get it right all the time. But if you focus on the relationship, you work on problem solving, and you apologize when you need to, it's mostly going to be okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's so interesting because all these things that you've mentioned, relationship, connection, empathy, being on the same team, working with
Yeah,
children, these will inevitably have a spillover effect into probably your relationships with other adults, right? And you would just
absolutely.
become a better person overall. I
Mm.
just want to backtrack a little bit. You did mention when you first started practicing clinically, you had this practice where you were kind of like punish bad behavior or good behavior, which is, I guess, gold parenting, the gold standard of parenting. I'm assuming things have evolved so
I
much.
hope things have, but
Well,
they're still
uh,
around.
what prompted your perhaps transition into kind of moving away from this model?
Okay, so I was, as an intern, I had to do an internship as a psychologist. So this is what we were taught: how to do behavior charts, how to do timeouts, how to do all of these things. I was involved in parenting sort of programs with parents. I guess what changed is that when I became a parent, I actually realized this doesn't work very well. um, sure, it does for short term. Like if you use it's going to get some sort of change. But for the long term change that you actually want, for helping build character um, and ethics and morals and just developing a person, not just something that someone's going to do the right or wrong thing, then you need more than that. And then that's when I started to look more into other areas. I looked into the effect of trauma on brain development, and those kind of reward punishments definitely don't work for someone who's experienced trauma. Um, but they actually in some ways instill some trauma as well, because they feed disconnection from the parent. So when I started to learn more about the relationship and how actually that's parenting, discipline is teaching, not harming. Yeah, so it was really when I became a parent and actually had to experience for myself, even though these poor parents I'd been telling for years what to do. And I have openly on my page apologized for that, because I feel, I mean, I was working with the information I had at the time. We all do the best that we can with the information we've got, but it was wrong information. So yeah, so
And
as a parent, and I worked it out, it's gone from there.
and in your when you've made this transition, how have you noticed just working with the various populations that you do work with, in terms of working with, I guess, that old model, and now you've adopted a more, I guess, applicable model?
Um, so you do see change, more significant change. It might happen more slowly. So that's something that parents are like, oh, they get really frustrated because it's not happening straight away. And that's because you've got to relearn, and your child has to relearn how to do things. Like they've set up patterns. This happens so I get punished, or this happens so mum yells, or this happens, so it takes time to change that, and to change and for the child to develop. We again comes back to brain development. Like the more we do it, these pathways are being built, but it doesn't happen instantly. I often say to parents, it's like learning to read or learning to ride your bike or tie your shoes. We don't just do that. Like it takes lots and lots of practice. And with anything, even help managing children's different behavioral issues at times, that's something we have to keep practicing and learning, and they have to keep practicing and learning, and the change won't happen instantly, but it's more long lasting. So you find that once you start taking on this way of dealing with a child's behavior, they will come to you more frequently and talk more calmly, not all the time because they can't, but they're more willing to do that because they've learned that it's okay. I'm not going to just get in trouble. We can work through it together. So yeah, I find that generally parents might be a bit resistant because they're not seeing instant change, but nothing's going to give you instant change. And this is going to give you the more long lasting. And then you see nice things happen too, like the relationship improves. and then they seem to enjoy parenting a bit better. The child's happier. If we feel happier, we behave better. Like, it's a flow-on effect.
Yeah, and I think it's safe to say when it comes to any form of long-lasting change, when it comes to health, wellness, the psyche, often it's going to take time and dedication and intention, and things that are quick will often be not quickly resolved, right?
That's right.
They'll often come back. I am going to put a pin in this notion of punishment because I'm going to parse that idea a little bit later on, because I do actually have a question specifically about that and that area of parenting. So a lot of the times, I think, again, I'm not a parent, but we're striving to make our children happy, right? But this can lead to maladaptive behaviors. So for instance, they're begging for a new toy, they're throwing a tantrum, and in that moment, we just want to make them happy. But is it our job to make children happy, right? What would you say perhaps is a proper response if, your child comes home one day and they say, I'm the only child who can't spell in my class? My question to you, Krysten, is how do you create a resilient child versus a happy child?
Okay. So there's a couple of things that you said in there. So I'm going to go back to the first thing you said, like if you say no to something and they have a tantrum or they get really upset about it. People think that this sort of parenting means that you just give them what they want. You don't do that. Boundaries are very, very important. They're important because they set up safety for the child. They know where the rules are. They know what's okay. But you're not trying to squash the emotions. You're not trying to make them happy all the time. What you would do in that situation, so say they want a biscuits before dinner, you would say, yeah, it's really hard to wait. Understand. It feels hard to wait. I get it. And you still can't have a biscuit. Would you like a hug? Because it's tricky. Would you like to do something else? You can come up with some other ideas. And you can let them be upset. That's okay. Be there, validate the feeling, name it, validate it, let them feel seen and heard. Comfort. There's nothing wrong with comforting a child when they're in the middle of a meltdown or a tantrum. That's another old way of thinking that you're rewarding the behavior. You're actually not. The child is dysregulated. They need help to regulate. If you gave the biscuit, yeah, you're rewarding the behavior. But if you're going, yeah, that's really hard, I'm give you a hug now because it's really tricky, that's just helping them calm. That's not rewarding the behavior. So that's one thing. Now, you said, so if a child comes home and says they're the only one that can't spell, okay. So parents, our first reaction is, yes, you can. Oh, you're good at other things. Don't worry about it. They're not worried, that's what we want to do. Not necessarily helpful. What you could do is just go, really? Oh, that must feel awful to feel like that. What makes you think that? Just be curious. Have a talk about it. It may be that they just got, quite a few mistakes in their test that day, and then you can just talk about that. Or they may genuinely have a learning difficulty, and that gives you clues to what you could do about that. But just be curious about how they're feeling about it. Like, it's okay that they're sad about this, but then you again go back to your problems. What could we do? What could we do to help with this? And that might be doing some extra work, or recognizing that we all have things that we're good at and we're not good at. What are your strengths? And you could talk about that. But you wouldn't jump to that straight away. Just be there, just listen, be curious, and try and work out what's really going on.
And I just want to say too, because I know you spoke a lot of good points there with this idea of this emotional validation, essentially, where you tell the child that you believe in them, that they'll know when they're ready. It makes sense that they feel this way, because essentially, inevitably, emotional validation in childhood will lead to self-confidence in adulthood. I do want to shift gears a little bit and speak a little bit about autism and ADHD, and perhaps some of your experience in working with those populations, right? So, for instance, autism. I know the rates are about around 1 in 50 children in Canada have now been given that diagnosis. It's been on the rise in the last few decades. ADHD, I think it's around 5 to 7% are diagnosed in Canada. We know that, again, in my opinion, children aren't always necessarily supposed to be able to sit still for several hours. And I know in one post too, I remember looking at this where you said movement helps them focus and they are not trying to be disruptive, right? And from a dietary perspective, a lot of children are eating sugar for breakfast and then they're going to school and they're expected to sit down for several hours. And then they're given, perhaps some sort of pathology, which might be true for some, but certainly not all of them. So, do you have any experience working with these children and or supporting parents? And can you talk a little bit about this?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I do. Both kids with autism and ADHD. Yes, you're right. That there's actually lots of things that could impact behaviour that would look like ADHD. So diet, yes. The expectations of being able to sit still, yes, that too. Also lack of sleep. I have seen many parents when I ask, do they sleep well? What time do they go to bed? And they're like, oh yeah, they sleep well. They put themselves to bed at 11 o'clock. And then they're up and then they've got to go. There's lots of studies that actually show lack of sleep or not enough sleep in children shows behaviors very, very similar to ADHD. So that would always be something that you'd need to consider as well. So there's lots of things that can contribute to that sort of behavior. Having said that, hopefully anyone that's doing proper assessments would look at all of that, and there's more to ADHD than just not being able to sit still. There's executive functioning, there's which is planning and being able to organize working memory. All of those kind of things contribute as well. So it's not just the bouncy kid at school. So what else did you want to ask me about that? Sorry, I think I've lost
I guess your experience perhaps working with these children, because I'm sure your approach would differ.
Sure. So it's again looking at what's behind the behavior, what's going on, having that understand that the movement is necessary. So people with ADHD, from a sensory perspective, if we're all, to be able to listen, to be able to focus, we're at a certain level. A child or an adult even with ADHD, their sensory input is low. They actually need more sensory input to be able to function and to listen and to focus. So often people will say to them they need to calm down. They don't. They actually need to calm up. They need more sensory input, which is why stimulant medication works, because it's actually stimulating them to get them to a calmer level. So that's why movement is important. So I think it's so funny though, sometimes I talk to adults and, they can't sit still. They're clicking their pens, they're chewing on things, they're trying, they drink a lot of coffee, which is a stimulant. And yet little kids that need more sensory input are told they have to sit still, eyes to the front and focus in class. It's just not possible. And actually it will take so much energy for them to try and do that they can't hear what's being said, because it takes everything they can to sit still. So when we look at the behavior and what it's trying to tell us, then we can put things in place to help support them in that. So we have breaks where they can have movement and then come back and sit down, and then they're more likely to focus. It's really important. So because working memory is usually something that's more tricky for people with ADHD, having things written down or visual timetables, or if a child has to do certain things at school, having it written down or pictures of what to do next, because that way they don't have to hold the information in their memory. They can just look at it. And if they get distracted, which they probably will, they can go back to their list and work out. Like I'll say that to parents with their morning routine, have it written down. So instead of you going, have you done this? Have you done that? Go and do this. You go, where are you up to on your list? And they go and have a look at their list and they can tick it off if they want to. They're the kind of things to look for. But I would also usually get involved an occupational therapist with a child with sensory processing difficulties like ADHD or autism to help work out what their specific needs are to help them be able to focus and do what they need to do.
Mm-hmm. I really like that example where you use the adult of, constantly clicking their pen or nail biting or fidgeting with their legs, and then they're just constantly ingesting caffeine, which is a stimulant, and that's almost often been normalized. But with children, it's not. It's such an interesting, I think, observation, one that I actually didn't think of until right now.
Yeah.
I do want to introduce boundaries. I know we spoke a little bit about it earlier on in the conversation. So this idea of boundaries, it's important, as you mentioned, where, for instance, they say no, they get upset, but you validate their feelings, yet you assert your response. And I think having the boundaries allows you to demonstrate empathy as well, right? I do want to kind of contrast and compare boundaries with requests as well, right? They often get intertwined and confused. So I know you kind of gave an example of setting a boundary with throwing a tantrum or a new toy. Can you perhaps provide an example that would illustrate a request and then outline how the two differ?
Okay, so a boundary is something that there's not a lot of movement on it. So no biscuit before dinner, no food before dinner. That's the rule. That's the boundary. This can't happen. A request is something more like, can you go and put your shoes on? It's not like if you don't put your shoes on, this is going to happen. It's more, or can you go and do this, go and get that for me. It's an asking, and there's a bit more flexibility in it. A boundary is absolutely, this is where the line is, and we can't cross that as well. So with a request, you've still got to be clear. You've got to make sure you've got your child's attention as well. But you can be, if they say, oh, can I do it when I've finished this? Yeah, that's usually okay. That's something parents often get a bit stuck on too. No, I said it, do it now. Well, would you, if your partner came and said, go and do this, and you're like, yeah, I'll just do this, I'll finish it, and they went, no, do it right now, how would you feel? That's when we've got these expectations that are not fitting. We wouldn't accept that. Why do we expect a child to stop if they're in the middle of doing something and do just because we said it? You need a little bit of flexibility. You need a little bit of understanding, and you're more likely to get them to do it if you have that. So you can then go, okay, but as soon as that's finished, I really need you to do it. And then, so that's more the request, whereas the boundary is absolutely, no, this is the line.
Mm-hmm. Would you agree that boundaries we are in control of our own boundaries, our own behavior, that is, whereas requests are completely out of our control and reliant on the individual, in this case, the child? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I know what you're saying. So are you talking about personal boundaries then, not as in parenting boundaries? Or?
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. And again, they're not as flexible. They're as like, this is where I'm drawing a line. I'm not allowing this to happen. You can explain it, but this is where the line is. Yeah, but a request is absolutely, it's got a bit more involvement in the other person and flexibility in where it goes.
Mm-hmm. Where do you think, I guess from, again, a parenting to a child perspective, ultimatums lie in this kind of scenario?
Give me an example of what you mean by an ultimatum.
Let's say, I'm trying to think of how this would apply to kind of like a parent-child relationship. In an extreme example, perhaps, if you don't do this, you will never see your mom again. I mean, that is definitely an extreme example and very harsh, one that I hope no child ever hears. But it's kind of one way of wrapping our head up this idea of ultimatums.
Okay, yeah, you're right. Very harsh. Unfortunately, people do say things like that, especially
Mhm.
when there's separation
Yeah.
and things like that. The problem with ultimatums a lot of the time is that we can't follow through with them anyway. Like parents will say these big, threats. If you don't do this, this will never happen, or you will never get to do this. Most of the time, that's not something we can follow through with. So it's not going to be helpful anyway, other than instilling fear in the child, which, sure, that will get a response. But do you really want your child to respond to you from fear? That again comes back to that needing the relationship and working on that relationship. If a child is just responding to you in fear, then that's not a place you want to be. They're not going to come to you when they need you. When they, like, if something's happened, you're not going to be their first person because they're going to be too worried about getting in trouble. It will also mean that they will see authority as, I do everything as I'm told because I'm fearful, and then they mindlessly follow directions because of fear, and then you can get into all sorts of other risky things that come. So fear and ultimatums is not going to be your best way of parenting. I understand as a parent that those things come out of our mouths sometimes, like
Mhm.
Santa won't come, or um, things like that. But it's not your best motivation. It will get a quick response, but it's not going to be the one that you actually want long term there. But yeah, I think that one of the biggest difficulties there with these ultimatums is we just actually can't do it. And so we end up going back on what we've said, which then breaks trust. Not that the child actually wanted that to happen, but in this sense, you've lied to them anyway. So does it really matter what you say?
Mhm. Um, I want to bring back now this idea of punishment. I know we
Mm-hmm.
spoke again a little bit earlier on, and I would love to kind of take apart this idea a little bit more in depth, because typically as parents, as we spoke about earlier, we praise good behavior and punish bad. Um, and this way of thinking is definitely rigid, it's linear, and I guess in the moment it's logical, but I think it's also thinking about it, it's how we often train animals, right, with
Yeah, that's
rewarding
where all
good
the
and
research came from. Yeah.
yeah. And so we have to take away things like technology, dessert, playtime, right? And is this truly beneficial? I mean, in my opinion, I think it could be a sign of desperation in that moment, right? From a parenting
Absolutely.
perspective.
Yep.
So what is your experience and or suggestions in dealing with punishment and or bad behavior?
Okay. So punishment is not discipline. And I think that's something that we need to change our thinking about. Punishment is deliberately trying to hurt or harm in a response to something that they did. Discipline is teaching. Discipline is helping them understand what they did was not the best thing to do and giving them the skills to change that next time. So something parents often do, and that's what we know, is that if a child does something, then they take something away. Now that's so illogical most of the time. So um, you you didn't get ready quickly enough in the morning, no screen time in the afternoon. Well, there's a heck of a lot of time in between that. The child's completely forgotten what they did in the morning, and yet they're not allowed screen time in the afternoon. How does that even make sense? They're not even connecting what they did to the behavior. The other thing parents might do is, okay, time out, go to time out because you've done the wrong thing. Go and think about what you've done. I 100% guarantee that child is not sitting there thinking, oh, yes, I did the wrong thing. Now, next time I better do something differently. No, they're sitting there going, this is so unfair. That wasn't my fault. That was my sister's fault. I'm going to get back at her, but without mum knowing next time. It actually means their focus is on them, not what they did. Their focus is on them feeling like um, that they've been harmed, that this is not fair, and does not change the behavior long term. Like we said, some of these things will work in that moment because behavioral strategies do work. I mean, we do know that there's a change in behavior learning when we do rewards and punishment, but not long term, not giving them the skills to think what they will do next time, not bringing that long term change, not bringing that development that we actually want. So instead of doing time out, do time in. So if a child's really like done something that's really difficult, you go sit with them and help them calm. When they've calmed, then go, okay, this didn't feel good for anybody. What could we do instead? How do you think your sister felt when you hit her? Okay, that wasn't good. Do you think she'll want to play with you if you do that? Like, how's she going to feel next time? Okay, I understand she did whatever it was. Yeah, that wouldn't have been fun. I get it. What else could we have done? In that way, you're not rewarding, bad behavior. You're still taking them away from the situation, but you're giving them skills to first learn to calm and then learn what to do next time. And also think about others, which is the empathy that we want them. We empathize with them and we get them to think about others as well. So, yeah, I get it. It feels awful when they cheat in a game. I hate it too. It's really frustrating. Like, validate it. Yeah, we do. We can't hit them though. Hitting's not okay. We've got to do something else. The other thing, parents will jump in too quickly. And they'll give a consequence, like I said before, that's not logical. It doesn't make any sense. What? So as much as you can, you do logical consequences. So if a child is saying, no, I'm not going to put my jacket on. I don't want to put my jacket on. Let them go and be cold. They'll soon learn, oh, maybe I should have put my jacket on. Or, those kind of things where there's a logical consequence, where there's something that's not, obviously you're not going to let them run out in the middle of the road if there's traffic, which I've had people say in my, no, obviously we're not going to let a child be harmed. And that's where you're a parent and you still need to actually physically keep your child safe. And yes, you would pick them up and you would grab them and get them out of harm's way. But if it's simple things like that, where there's a logical consequence, that a natural consequence, not just a logical consequence, a natural consequence of what would happen if we allow that to occur, then let it happen. It's okay. This is how they learn. And then talk to them about it. Oh, you were cold today. What do you reckon you could have done instead? Maybe put your jacket in your bag. Things like that. Like, we don't need to be on them all the time. Sometimes you just need to sit back a little bit and be that person to talk them through afterwards.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really loved how you provided the distinction between, punishment, a natural consequence, and what was the other thing? Yeah. Oh, a discipline, and how you kind of parse those ideas rather. And I think it's just so beautifully said and so simple to understand. Probably a lot more complex to implement, I'm sure. But also, I love how you mentioned, when there is an area an experience or a circumstance where we might often punish, but thinking about what skills can we instill in the child that perhaps when this next situation or a similar situation arises, they are now well equipped to kind of be better in that situation with this skill, as opposed to simply punishing them. I think we are definitely beings of connection and attachment, and so I think all children are good, and good children perhaps do bad things because they just don't have the skills, and it's our job as parents, and again, I'm not a parent, but to teach them these skills, right? I want to talk about one more thing that I think is of relevance in today's society, and that's bullying. So something we definitely can't avoid, and for sure is on the rise, with the advent of social media and other technological platforms. Now, as I mentioned many times, I'm not a parent, right? So perhaps it's easier said than done. But if I were to have a child right now, right, in my current stance, I would not allow them to have access to social media. It's almost, unambiguous, unequivocal that social media is destroying our children. Again, this is definitely easier said than done. I'm speaking from not a parental lens here. And perhaps if you didn't give the child social media, I'm sure that would be a form of bullying. I can provide an example where I just got social media perhaps a year and a half or 2 years ago. Before that, when I would meet adults, they would think I'm crazy when I never had it. I can't even imagine what a child would go through in a similar circumstance, right? So,
Mm.
Chris, my question to you is, how do you navigate, social media and raising children in today's climate?
It is really tricky. And, there's been times I've worked in schools and I've seen 5-year-olds talk about how they do TikTok videos without their parents knowing, which just is horrifying because
Mhm.
you're right, the risks are huge. Also, again, back to brain development, they're not able to think through consequences of what they put on there. And, even teenagers are very impulsive, that forward thinking is not there. So they put something out there and all of a sudden that's there forever. That's in the world for
Mhm.
everyone to see and you can't take it back. Um, but you're right. I have also, even with my children, I didn't allow my children to have any access to social media until they were at high school, um, which I'm not sure if that's works the same way. So like 13,
Yeah,
um,
14.
around
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah. So and in that, my daughter was like, yeah, but everyone's on Snapchat and that's how they talk to each other. Like I can't talk to anyone. And she didn't have a mobile phone either, because that was another thing that we didn't allow. So there's got to be some understanding. This is a world that we didn't grow up in. The rules have changed. The way people socialize has changed. The way they interact is so different to when I was a child. Um, so we have to keep on top of understanding these platforms, understanding how they work. And then you've got to make some allowances around that, but be really careful. Like I'm not advocating for parents to allow their children on social media or have phones, especially young children. If they're just not able to manage that, they're not able to think through it. But I do think like you said, you've got to be flexible. So some things that I've done in my family is like I've had one of my old mobile phones that's not the kids' phone, but they're allowed to use it for certain things with my permission, with my knowledge. Not in bedrooms is another rule that we have. So, there's no one watching if you're in a bedroom. You're more likely to do something that's a bit stupid, especially if it's late at night when people aren't thinking clearly. So definitely no phones in bedrooms. But yeah, if you have a phone, so we've just moved states. My son wanted to stay in contact with some of his friends from where we were. This is a day and age where people don't even have home phones a lot of the time. So he can't even ring his friends without taking up someone else's, like mum or dad's mobile phone. So we've allowed him to have kids messenger so that he can talk to him, but we've put pretty strict rules. I can monitor it. I know what's going on, who's ringing, who his friends are, that kind of thing. You've just got to be involved. But also you've got to talk to your kids. So again, it comes back to, that relationship. These are the risks. This is why I want to put some rules in place. What do you get them involved? What do you think would be okay? Do you think it's okay that we don't have it in the bedroom? Like he may go, no, that's not okay because I don't have any privacy. Okay, well, I still think this is an important boundary that we have. Where could we get you some privacy that's still okay? Get them involved so they understand why the rules are there. And if that connection, that relationship's still good, if you've set up with them, if something happens that makes you feel uncomfortable, you see me straight away. Not to get in trouble, not to have phones removed or things removed, to help. And then so you've got that established sort of relationship. But I think we have to be educating ourselves and our kids from a very early age. It's not where we just wait until they're teenagers before we tell them about social media or phones. The preparation has to start very early so that they understand it. So if you're on social media, something came up that I don't like to see, I'm going to block that. That's not something that we do. Like, even from an early age, you can explain that things come up that you don't want to see, that's not good. That's why we need to have, someone around to help if we need to. It's why we're very careful with who you follow, and you don't ever follow people, like, you don't ever have people that don't know you follow your account if it's a private account. It's different when you're public, but yeah. So those kind of things, and just from very, very early age, because they'll see it if you don't teach it. Parents think, well, it's not in our house. Well, they're going to see it not in your house. They'll see it on the bus. They'll see it at kids' phones at school. They'll see it other places.
What are your thoughts on, if we just remove social media, or we can even still talk about this, but like YouTube and other, I guess, platforms where children, again, at very young ages, I mean, I'm just thinking about examples when I walk in the city and I'm looking in strollers and children, kids, I don't know how old, they have phones, they have iPads, and it's like, in my head, I'm like, wow, that's crazy. I would never do that. But also, I think of another perspective, because a lot of my friends have children and we have these conversations, and they often say, especially in the early stages, and they say, George, you would give your kid an iPad if you could sleep for 2 hours. And you know what? They're probably right. So I'm sure it's a difficult kind of situation to navigate, but I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
That's one of those things that perfect parents do before they have children, is not give their kids screens, which was, I think, one of the things I was going to do as well. Look, I don't advocate just giving a child a screen, but there are times when you do need to do that. So I'm not judging a parent for doing that. There's absolutely times when you are just, I need an hour to get stuff done, or a break, and okay, that's as long as you've got your parental locks and you know that they're going to be okay doing that. Yeah, it's all right. And we don't want to like throw the good out with the bad. There is actually some really good things on YouTube. I know during COVID lockdowns, my son loved learning all these origami things, and he was making all these amazing things, and that was on YouTube. And if we'd said no screens, well, he wouldn't have been able to do that. So there is a time and a place for it. The problem is when we give screens too early, that does impact brain development. So too much too early, not so good, but we all have done it every now and then. But the other issue is when that's the only thing that we're doing. So a child, like a board screen. We don't want that either. We want them to be able to use their creativity. It's okay to be bored, because that's when we come up with really creative ideas. That's when, you can turn something else. Like, my kids hate it they actually never say they're bored, because they know my response will be, fantastic, what can you come up with? I can't wait to see what it'll be. They like roll their eyes at me, because I'm not going to just give them something to do. I give them options. It's not like you just go and do your own thing, but you've got this, you could do this, you could do that. Wonder what else you could come up with. So that can be a really positive thing. So I guess, yes, use it in moderation when you need it. And work out whether it's good screens or not so good screens. So, like just mindlessly watching thing over and over and over is maybe not so good, but something practical. So you might learn dance routines. They might learn, like I said, origami. They might learn other skills, or they're researching a topic that they really love. They can learn all about dinosaurs. They could learn about all sorts of things. That's okay, as long as they're not doing it too much, but that would be seen as a positive sort of screen experience. And the thing is that we as parents then need to be prepared. So if you're out at restaurants, I always have a pack of cards in my handbag, because my kids they'll play cards while we're waiting for food. Or when they were really young, I had like a little bag of toys. They were special toys that were only for when we went to restaurants. So they knew they only got to play with them when we're at a restaurant. It gives you some other options other than screens. Screens is easy, but it doesn't have to be the only thing. And if